May 24th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. My name is Chris Ramey. I'm the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. Thanks for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the Planning Commission to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with a public comment, followed by deliberations and possible action on two appeals: the Greg Harmon and Linda Gentry zone change, Z20-9, and the Laurel Hill PUD 18-3. There are several housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format I need to take care of. First, thank you for your patience while I work my way through them. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. For those who join the meeting via computer device or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't done so already, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. When public comment begins, our meeting moderator will announce the next two speakers at a time. When it's your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone. Public comment is limited to 10 minutes, so your time to speak will be based on the number of people signed up to speak. Finally, I want to thank everyone for your patience, flexibility, and good humor as we work within this new virtual meeting format. As always, feel free to contact staff if there is testimony you were not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. So item A, public comment. Amy, do we have anyone with their hands up? I do not see anyone. Anyone on the telephone? No. Okay.
We don't have any hands up.
No hands up. And
sorry.
No, that's fine. So I'm going to close the public comment then, and we'll move on to agenda item B, deliberations and possible action. Greg Harmon and Linda Gentry zone change, Z20-9. And Nick is here to lead us through this part of the meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to share screen and put up the testimony, and then we can just walk through it, I think, pretty quickly. I have so many things open on my screen that it's going to take me a second here to find the right document. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see this. And I need to pull up another document to be able to read, and I can't.
Okay, Nick, I see Lauren Summers has her hand up. So yeah. Lauren, do you want to jump in? Can you do that?
Thanks, Commissioner Ramey. Yes, while Nick is kind of working on getting the right thing up on the screen, I just wanted to offer Commissioner Borowski the opportunity to, because he wasn't physically, virtually present for the public hearing, to talk about whether he had the opportunity to watch the public hearing and if he has any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts to declare before we get into it.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, I did watch the webcast and have gone through all of the documentation that's been sent there. As far as ex parte communications or things, I just wanted to declare that I do drive by the subject property in my course of business, so I'm aware of it just to the extent that any other of the public would notice it on their day-to-day type of commutes or those types of things. I turn left or turn right at that intersection about 3 times a week.
Okay.
And that no way will affect my deliberations on this matter.
And then Commissioner Fragola. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Yep, got it. Just wanted to note that I had left this meeting a little bit early, and though it didn't apply to this agenda item, it does apply to the next. And I also watched the recording. And so just wanted to check in on that.
Thanks,
Okay.
Commissioner Flagler. So you watched the even though you had to leave a little bit before the end of the Laurel Ridge public hearing, you went back and watched the full public hearing for that item. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
One more thing, Lauren. So this is just for the first one, right? We'll do that again for the second one.
Yes, Commissioner Rafsky, that would be great.
All right.
Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see the screen. Okay.
Yes.
Great. I just need to pull something else up. And I don't know if that means, I don't know what you're seeing on the screen. I can't.
Right now, Nick, we're seeing your PDF of the different pieces of testimony.
Okay. Yeah, I can't seem to pull up my notes now to, I'm just going to scroll through. The first one was from Dane Butler, and I believe we think that everything in this was either right to the one of the appeal issues or was not new evidence or testimony that wasn't already in the record.
Yes, just a second, Nick. I think Lauren's going to tell us what we're doing, and if she isn't, I'm going to.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramey. Yes, before Nick jumps into the nitty-gritty, I thought it might be helpful to do a quick overview of what we're about to ask of the Planning Commission. So as you'll recall, because this is an appeal of a quasi-judicial land use application, the Planning Commission is limited in a couple of ways. The first is that Planning Commission is not allowed to consider evidence that was not before the hearings official. So kind of shorthand for that is no new evidence. And the other limitation on the Planning Commission is that Planning Commission is limited to considering the appeal issues that were raised by the appellant. In this case, there are 6 of them. So if there's a piece of testimony that either includes new evidence that the hearings official did not have access to, or is outside the scope of the those 6 identified appeal issues, that's really not within the ability of the Planning Commission to consider. And so what Nick has done is taken all the written testimony that was submitted to the Planning Commission for this zone change appeal matter and highlighted the pieces of the testimony where staff believes they either constitute new evidence or are simply sort of outside the scope of the identified appeal issues. And Nick will walk you through each of those highlighted portions and identify whether that's new evidence or outside the scope. If it's new evidence, we're going to ask Planning Commission specifically to reject and not consider that evidence. If it's simply outside the scope of the identified appeal issues, we're flagging that for Planning Commission. You don't need to take any affirmative action to reject that testimony. It's just a matter of noting for you that that's sort of beyond the scope of what you're allowed to consider. So and I guess quickly, I don't know that Nick has a slide of this, but for your information, the definition of evidence, both in our land use code and in the land use statutes, is as follows: facts, documents, data, or other information that is offered to demonstrate compliance or non-compliance with the standards believed by the proponent to be relevant to the decision. So when we're talking about new evidence, that's what we're talking about. And then, so facts, documents, data, other information specific to the approval criteria for this application. And then separately, we might be talking about some information that doesn't necessarily constitute new evidence, but is not really relevant to the appeal issues identified or the approval criteria for a zone change application. And with that said, Nick, take it away.
Okay. Thanks for that. So the first piece of testimony that came in was from Dane Butler. And again, looking at it, it's either directly associated with one of the appeal issues about traffic, and we're not thinking that this introduces any new evidence that wasn't already in the record. So I'm just going to skip down to the next one. This one came in from Michael Malley. And again, most of this testimony is related to one of the appeal issues. There is some reference to things that were in the record but are not appeal issues, specifically when it comes to things about noise and odor and the operation hours. But in a general sense, depending on how you want to look at this, you can look at it and say, well, that kind of leads into the appeal issue about putting the site review overlay on this property, which these type of issues are possibly dealt with a site review overlay. So you can look at it that way and just say, yes, I guess in a 30,000 mile view, it does hit at the appeal issue. I think that's appeal issue number 6. Things like light intrusion, things like that. We've highlighted it for you, but it's a judgment call. We're thinking that there's nothing really wrong with any of this testimony.
So if I could jump in, it sounds like the bottom line for Mr. Malley's highlighted testimony is that it's not new evidence when staff is not asking Planning Commission specifically to reject it. It may be either, arguably outside the scope of some of the appeal criteria, but maybe not, as Nick identified, and or arguably not relevant to the zone change approval criteria. It seems to focus in on specific uses which haven't been identified for this site yet, because this is just a zone change. So this is something that staff wanted to highlight for Planning Commission, but I think that staff is not specifically asking Planning Commission to take any action with regard to this highlighted testimony. Is that accurate, Nick?
Correct. And I don't know if we want to weigh in on these pieces as we go through them, or just go through all of this and then talk about it when we're done. I mean, if there's anything that the commission wants to do with any of the evidence, I'm not clear on that, but I think the best thing to do is just go through this. There's not that much, and then we could talk about it as a whole if you need to after. Okay. I'll take that head nod. Thank you. Next piece of testimony. This is from Joyce Bullock. This is a complaint basically about conditions on the property as they exist right now. It's talking about high weeds, noxious environment. I'm trying to be kind with the words it talks about. You can all read it. Just for background information, I sent this person an email in response to this saying that this is really a complaint for our Code Compliance Division, and I forwarded the information to file a complaint, as well as a link to the form to file a complaint and information on that. I don't think this is, although things like high grass and were talked about and introduced as evidence in the beginning, I'm not certain this applies to any appeal issues, and you may want to consider striking this.
So, Nick, can I ask a follow-up question? Is this, really we have two different things, right? If this is evidence, if there were arguments made to the hearings official about the state of the property, including tall grass, then this wouldn't be new evidence and it doesn't need to be rejected, but it is outside the scope of the appeal issue. So it's not something, Planning Commission is not going to make a decision on whether the property should be mowed because that's outside of their scope. Right. So does this constitute new evidence that staff is asking Planning Commission to reject, or is it just outside of the scope?
Well, I couldn't find anything about rats and snakes. When it says vagrants, there was evidence originally put in about people, squatters, I guess, getting into the home. Now we're talking about vagrants and pests and things like that. That's possibly new evidence, but I think if the proper thing to do is just not consider this, leave it in. That's the easiest way.
If it helps, Lauren, I'll jump in here and say that this fits within the theme of a variety of testimony we did hear early on before the hearing's official. I wouldn't consider it new evidence in a general sense, but it is definitely outside the scope of the appeal.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so unless any planning commissioners have objection, I think we would just move on, not ask for a specific rejection, but remind planning commissioners that that's outside the scope of the appeal issues identified.
Thanks, Lauren.
The next one was from Marika Owen, and I have to look through here myself because I can't. I think all of this is talking about traffic, and it's the appeal issues about traffic. There is this section about again, noise, unwanted foot traffic in general. It's stuff that was introduced as evidence originally, although it doesn't specifically go to an appeal issue unless you want to consider it as part of the appeal issue number 6, which is instituting the site review overlay. You could generally say it meets that, but I don't think there's anything here different from the other testimony that highlighted the same issues. So I don't think there's any concern with this. We just wanted to highlight it for you that parts of these testimony or maybe are not directly related to the appeal issues, almost indirectly, I think is the word we're trying to use. This one was from John Fowle as head of or coming from the Northeast Neighbors Neighborhood Association. Again, hitting to all the appeal issues about the Metro Plan designation and inconsistency. We don't think there's anything in here. All of this is about the appeal issues, so no issues with that testimony. And then this one that came in from the applicant's representative attorney. We think all of this is appropriate. And so I'm not going to scroll through this. I think this is the last piece of testimony. And then Troy Slonecker for the applicant also weighed in, and we think this is all appropriate too. So really, we just had those first ones we talked about, and I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Ramey.
Thank you, Nick and Lauren and Gabe. I think the issue here is whether this is new evidence. And what I'm hearing you say is that it does not appear to be new evidence, although it might be questionably relevant to the issue at hand. And as I understand it, the commission would want to take direct action to strike new evidence, but we do not need to be anything else but aware of the fact that some of this may be tangentially aligned with the appeal issues. I got that. So in fact, what I'm suggesting is we probably don't need to take action, but I'm sure the rest of the commissioners are in line with that. Okay, I don't see anyone raising their hands or wildly waving. So I think with that, Nick, we can move on. We've examined the record and determined that it's all A-okay.
Okay, I've got another slideshow that we can I can look at real quick. And again, trying to find it here. That's fun. Oh, here we go. Let me go to the beginning here real quick. And then I'll have, I'm just going to run through these slides. This is not like the presentation we did last time, but I've got things up that we can then go back and refer to if we need to. And I just want you to see them all. So this is the vicinity map. This is the one I showed you at the appeal hearing. And just for context, so you can see where the property is. It's the hashed red property. And again, the zoning map. It's the same map you've seen. And wanted to just show you, it was attached to our staff report as attachment D. This is a look at the properties within 2 miles, bike facilities. This is getting to the appeal issue about adequate support population. And the thing that we wanted to bring up is that, you know, with the applicant's materials, we felt there wasn't quite enough there to make this determination. And also looking at the RNS decision that Planning Commission had made previous to this over a very similar issue about support population, we went out and did our own look at it to make sure that there was an adequate support population, bearing in mind the decision that you had given us in the RNS, and then looking at the context of what was around. And so our staff report talks about this, and these are the 2 pieces of information. This slide, which is the 2 mile bike facilities area, and then a look at the what's within a 1/4 mile and what's within a 1/2 mile for pedestrian facilities. And you can see the 2 lines here. Let me get my pointer. You can see the 2 lines here. This is the 1/4 mile that we looked at, and this is the 1/2 mile line. You can see the areas that it encompasses.
Okay, Nick, I think I've got a couple of questions if we can interrupt you here. I've got Commissioner Edwards and then Commissioner Borowski.
Thanks, Chair Ramey. I could not help notice, Nick, if you would go back 1 to the 2 mile radius, I can't help but notice, and I will say that this is my neighborhood area. There is a significant amount of development that is not represented here, that is new development. And it, like I said, it is quite significant. So I believe it would fall within the 2 miles. So I guess my question is how old this is. The map that's in the record, but I know that that's what to base it on, but I'm not sure how to address that. So I just wanted to mention that. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just jump in to clarify. Nick has a few slides that show various evidence from the record that relate to various appeal issues. And so, you know, it's a little bit disjointed here, but this is a piece that's related to the question of adequate support population as well within the, you know, scope of the appeal. In this case, I believe the map is really only intended as a reflection of bike facilities, right? So it's not a reflection of development that either existing or proposed, right? It's really just context for the map that follows that staff prepared. Jeff Gepper actually prepared that, you know, on the heels of the RNS appeal and this question of what is adequate to determine, you know, the support population in the context of the siting criteria. Nick, if you could go to the next map, that's where Jeff had prepared a deeper dive analysis to look at what's out there, right? And we know that the language talks about in the Metro Plan existing and future population, but this is really kind of focused on what's there now, so to speak. So I believe this is an air photo that reflects current development as of maybe 2019. So if that helps, just for a little context, I thought I'd offer that.
Thank you. Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. Just for clarification, were these maps or diagrams available to the hearings official, or are these new evidence?
Most definitely. They were included in the as part of the staff report and materials that went on up to the hearings official. So it was definitely within the record.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Next map. This This piece came from testimony that was given by, I think this is Jeannie Savage. And this was mentioned in the, I think Dane Butler mentioned this map and talked about it in his testimony at the appeal hearing last week. And we just wanted to have it, be able to talk about it if we need to. But the key thing here is this was something that was introduced in someone's testimony. The question of that this now becomes evidence as some kind of factual evidence, I think we disagree with that. This is just something that was supplied by somebody talking about the cut through traffic that might come through their neighborhood. So we wanted to have this slide available in case that becomes part of the discussion. Another map that was referenced both in testimony, well, it came up, obviously it was referenced in the original testimony that the hearings official had access to. This is in a portion of Inset Map D out of the Willikins area plan. And so that came up again in the appeal, and we wanted to have this slide available just so we can talk about it if we need to. Wanted to bring up something about neighborhood commercial facilities. And this is language directly out of the Metro Plan. And then forgive me because I was scrambling this morning to just get this stuff into this PowerPoint. So it doesn't look maybe as pretty as a typical PowerPoint would. But this is the exact language that I took from the section of, I think this is on 2G5 of the Metro Plan. This is the language that talks about neighborhood commercial facilities not shown on the Metro Plan diagram. So if we need to refer to any of this language, I've got these two slides that capture all of the language about that. And then there's obviously a lot of discussion about Old Coburg Road. And just for clarity, we've got two pieces of Old Coburg Road that can get interchanged in this discussion. There's Old Coburg Road, which is sometimes also referred to as Chad Drive. And that's the main road that connects to Game Farm and then back over to where it hits Coburg Road. There's also Old Coburg Road, which we refer to in our staff report as West Frontage. And that's the piece that kicks off straight to the north and is on the west side of the property that we're talking about. And in the, there was a memo that we put into the file back on March 17th. And in that memo, there is pieces of testimony from our public works engineering staff about the road and the classification of the road, and also, and I'm highlighting here pieces out of this out of our staff memo that you can all go and see because it was also supplied to you. And the hearings official did have this, that staff does not believe there's relevant approval criteria or any clear basis for the requested restriction as part of the requested zone change. What this, and I've got the language here in another slide too, that what we're talking about is the restriction to not allow access on the western portion of Old Coburg Road on the west side of this. And I've got more language here that talks about it. The key thing that we want to bring up and maybe is not highlighted specifically is that when this property does develop in the future, that's when access connections will be looked at. The zone change doesn't have criteria that talks about access connections at this point. And so we can't look at this and assume we know exactly what's going to go on this property. And I think everybody understands that. The issues have come up about Dairy Mart in particular because the applicant has mentioned they've had discussions with that entity about a convenience store. And the traffic impact analysis that the applicant had to do talked about a convenience store. It also talked about restaurants. It talked about office. There's a number of things that can go in with commercial. And so the key point to remember here is that access in our codes typically talks about going to the lowest classification of road, which in this case would be the western portion of Old Coburg Road. It's a neighborhood street. However, there is adjustment, the capability to request an adjustment at the time you have your development proposal to try to get access perhaps on the other portion of Old Coburg Road or even Game Farm. Those are all possible. Access on Game Farm would be something that Lane County would have jurisdictional control over. There is a deceleration lane on Game Farm. It is possible to do some type of restricted movement on the Game Farm, but that's not something we can know at this point because we don't know exactly what's going on the property. And so the key point to talk about here is that the zone change criteria doesn't put you in the position of trying to determine where access will absolutely be taken at this point. And that comes at a later stage. And the ability to put access on other portions of this property is something that can be adjusted. You can go through adjustment review process, which is type 2 process. And I don't know, Gabe might want to weigh in a little bit more on that.
Sure. Just again, to loop back, provide a little bit more context. I know Commissioner Isaacson, following the hearing, had requested more information about the quote 20-foot wide roadway there. And so really Nick's kind of focused on that where it's referred to in the record. I think these highlighted sections come from a memo that our resident expert, Scott Gillespie, as an engineer on behalf of Public Works, provided us information really responding to the TPR, the Transportation Planning Rule, and addressing some of the allegations about its inadequacies. And I think, in combination with, that reference to the map that neighbors had supplied in terms of deliveries that may come through the neighborhood, and really sort of reaching to the question of whether or not the TPR analysis should have addressed an intersection farther afield than it did. This memo that Scott prepared, I think, provides some of the best information to help ground the commission and in the details in this case, in particular around the classification of that street. I think the salient point there is Nick really hit it well, is that in the context of a zone change, we don't have the ability to require or to look at the specific uses that are allowed by the C1 zone. In terms of context for what could occur, we can look to the code, but any one of those uses in the C1 allowed use list could technically occur. So this focus on a particular use like a dairy mart or convenience store, while maybe based on things that the applicant has mentioned, is really not germane or a focus of the commission's decision on appeal. And so in that sense, I just wanted to kind of provide a little more context and really trying to be responsive to Commissioner Isaacson's question.
I saw Commissioner Beeson, your hand was up, and okay.
It was, and then
there you go.
It's back up. I don't want you to repeat all that. I think I understand it, and I guess as both of you were talking, I was kind of wanting to see the map. I think what there isn't any development proposal at all. We're being asked to consider the appeal issues related to a requested zone change. But I was thinking about Commissioner Isaacson's question also, and I was kind of, as I was going through the material, trying to figure that out. I guess I'm kind of assuming, based on what I was hearing from Nick and from Gabe, going forward, as a development proposal comes forward and somebody looks to develop that property, it's not unreasonable to assume that access could occur virtually on all three sides. Is that accurate?
That is correct. And I think, you know, again, one of the most salient points that's referred to or mentioned in Scott's memo, and we consulted and reviewed Chapter 7 code requirements. I just wanted to be sure and factually correct in noting that adjustment review is an option for the applicant in the future, right? And we cannot at this point predict or force a requirement in terms of where access would be taken. But we wanted to provide that context to note that, you know, in the event of a future development proposal, they would certainly have the right to request that adjustment review and to be able, under those criteria, to justify access and potentially obtain approval for that, either to Old Coburg on the east side of the property or potentially through county jurisdiction to North Game Farm. So you are correct.
Thank you.
I don't know if Commissioner Beeson wanted to see the map again. I thought you said that in the beginning, but.
No, I don't. I'm fine. We've gone down the road a bit, and I've looked at the map quite a bit. When you were talking about Game Farm Road and the different access, I found myself just kind of wanting to be. I think I'm oriented well enough. Thanks.
And Nick, I think at this point, I'd like to take a pause on any of the additional materials you have on slides and turn it back to Chair Ramey and see, are there any key questions kind of leading into deliberations, and then propose that we potentially move into that phase and start with appeal issue 1 and start to walk through that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so at this point, any broad questions for anything that Nick ran by us or anything might have occurred to you in the meantime? Otherwise, I think we can just start going through them one at a time. That works. Yes? Some nodding. Okay, very good. Like, nodding is good. So with that, I think it's right to have Nick steer the ship here, I think, and read us through appeal issue number 1, and we'll talk about it and take action. I presume we'll do them one at a time, and then we'll do one vote at the end for all 6. Is that right?
Yeah, you just.
Commissioner Ramey, yes, that's what we're proposing. The format that you've used in the past with a straw poll for each appeal issue, and then a final motion and vote on the whole final order.
Okie dokie.
I'm trying to, get some things up for me to look at here. I just need about 10 more seconds. Okay. And I still can't get rid of my PowerPoint. Okay, so the first appeal issue, appeal number 1, the hearings of, you want me to just read through the appeal issue and then, okay. The hearings official erred by determining, in quotes, that the campus industrial designation is identified on a refinement plan, does not negate or in any way limit the zoning allowed under the Metro Plan, unquote. And I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do.
No, that's good. That's good. Okay. So now it's commissioners who have comments or thoughts on this appeal issue, and then we'll do a straw vote. Or we can move directly to straw vote if there are no comments or thoughts. Commissioner Beeson.
Well, I'm going to share a couple of thoughts. I've been thinking about it quite a bit. And I'll talk specifically about appeal issue 1. I know that's what we're doing here. I guess I want to say, I think there's as you go through these, I found myself having similar thoughts about each one, you know, in terms of what we're being asked to look at here. For myself, I try to go through all of the material as best I can, and it's from the appellant or from the applicant, from the staff, and so on, and look at this material. And we're looking at whether to make this zone change from R1 to C1. And I think, specifically here, when I got into what the appellant was looking at was this idea that this parcel specific designation in the Wilkinson area plan precludes the C1 zoning. And I will admit to being a little confused by that. I spent time trying to go through and figure that out. I think I was sort of generally understanding, but I guess I want to say that for me, a lot of times on things like this with appeals, after I've gone through the hearings official decision, I've gone through the staff notes, I've looked at what both the appellant and the applicant are submitting, and it seemed to be a pretty strong consensus across the board that this zoning, the request to change the zone is consistent, or to change it to C1 is consistent with this campus industrial zoning that's in the Metro Plan, and I think also in the Wilkinson area plan, or at least referred to there. So I just was not able to find anything. I looked or tried to think it through, but I couldn't really find anything that would cause me to question all of that. So I'm on appeal issue number 1. I'm not. I guess I'm in support of what the hearings official found and what the staff is recommending.
Okay, Commissioner Edwards.
Thanks, Chair Ramey. I just want to make a general. Statement, because I think that the stakeholders on this issue obviously have very strong feelings about this, and we run into this situation with every one of these appeals. The Planning Commission's purview is extremely limited and extremely specific to the issues for which the appeal was assigned. And I definitely sympathize, I empathize. I read through a lot of the statements and a lot of the evidence in the record, and I found that there was just a disconnect between what was being articulated and what was actually being addressed as specific to an error that the hearings official would have made. So I just want to generally say that this is what we face every time. We do not get to apply a bias to these decisions. They are very much quasi-judicial. And so, again, there's a lot of information, a lot of passionate people about this, but I'm really taking this seriously and have to focus on the evidence and what our very specific role is in this. So, and I would say that for all of these issues. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. And I would support. I mean, my strategy, my approach to these is much the same as Commissioner Beeson mentioned with the, with the toning that you put on it, Commissioner Edwards, that we're looking particularly in what's in front of us as an appeal issue. And then we're looking back through the testimony and the appellant's statement. And I always finish up reading the hearings officials' documents so I can see what went through their mind. And in this case, with appeal issue 1, I'm confident, satisfied that the hearings official got it right. Any other commissioners want to add a comment at this point, or are we ready for a straw vote? Nodding. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move us to a straw vote on this one, appeal issue 1. And I believe the vote is that we would, oh boy, Lauren, so we would deny the appeal and support the hearings officials' findings. Is that correct?
Sure, or a different way to articulate it would be those planning commissioners who agree with the hearings official or find the hearings official did not err with respect to appeal issue number 1, you can raise your hand.
Okay. So commissioners who find the hearings official did not err, raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you. So let's move on to appeal issue 2 then.
Okay, appeal issue 2 is the hearings official erred by determining the Metro Plan text related to neighborhood commercial takes precedent over parcel specific campus industrial plan designation of the subject property without identifying any apparent conflicts between the plan text and plan diagram.
And Nick, maybe or Gabe, maybe for Planning Commission and or those listening at home, can you do just a couple sentence recap of the staff response to that appeal issue, or what the hearings official found, just so everybody has a little more background?
Sure. I think it was mentioned by Commissioner Beeson initially in regards to appeal issue 1, but I think that at the heart of this is the assertion that there needs to be some sort of a conflict in order to allow the C1 zone, and just simply the hearings official found that that was not necessary and that there was no conflict. And so in terms of how the C1 zone operates, you'll notice that Nick pulled up that language from the Metro Plan. It's a designation that is not shown on the Metro Plan land use diagram, right? There are siting criteria for the neighborhood commercial facilities in both the Metro Plan as well as our code. And she looked at those in context with this request and found that that basically as a quote floating zone, that the C1 allowance in this case is not contingent upon some sort of a conflict. So, and she did not find a conflict between the Metro Plan and the Willow-Kenzie area plan. So hopefully that context helps a little.
Yeah, and if I could add, I think when we put it in our summary of this, but I think it wraps it up very nicely what the hearings official actually said on page 3, that the campus industrial designation is identified on a refinement plan diagram does not negate or in any way impact the zoning allowed under the Metro Plan. And I think that's the key part of that decision.
Okay, Commissioners, ready for a straw vote? So show of hands if you, Commissioner Borowski, yes.
Gabe or Nick, maybe you can just, so it seems to me that the appellant is, in this case, is looking for a conflict so that the clause that says if there is a conflict, then you revert to a Metro Plan diagram or you revert to the refinement plan. Is that kind of what they were looking for in this? Is that your interpretation? And then the hearings official didn't find that conflict, so that statute doesn't.
It's not abundantly clear to staff, but I would say that there is mention in the zone change criteria about what takes precedence in the event of a conflict between a refinement plan and the Metro Plan. And if there is a conflict, then the Metro Plan essentially controls. And I believe, and I'm reaching a little bit, my interpretation of this appeal issue is that the assertion of a conflict is a predicate to reaching the Metro Plan text, which describes the allowance for citing C1. And hearings official found that there wasn't the need for a conflict in order to reach that. That the text of the Metro Plan, which is part and parcel of the diagram, it describes how the diagram works in the Metro Plan, that the applicant or any applicant honestly could avail themselves of that without a conflict.
Right. I was just trying to figure out where this came from, and that helps me. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioners, I think we're ready for a straw poll on this one. Show of hands if you believe the hearings official did not err in her findings related to appeal issue 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you. Appeal issue 3.
Okay, appeal issue 3. The hearings official erred by approving the zone change to C1 in direct conflict with the Willow-Kenzie area plan policy that the city shall allow for a gradual transition of the subject property from residential to industrial use. And this is the appeal issue where the appellant is contending that the zone change to C1 is a direct conflict with the Wilkins area plan, specifically the Coburg Crescent subarea policy 4. Hearings official determined that the Metro Plan text related to neighborhood commercial takes precedent over any parcel specific campus industrial plan designations of the property. And we think it's our interpretation that the hearings official got that correct.
Commissioners, any thoughts or comments on this one? Okay, raise your hand if you believe the hearings official found correctly and approved the zone change in accordance with the items raised in Appeal Issue 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you. Appeal Issue 4.
The hearings official erred by determining the surrounding transportation system can be extended to serve the uses and density allowed under the C1 zone, and that the C1 zone will not significantly affect an existing transportation facility pursuant to OAR, Oregon Revised Statute 660-012-0060. And this is the appeal issue that the appellant is asserting that there was an error by not addressing evidence in the record that the projected traffic on that west side of Old Coburg Road would exceed the range acceptable for a local street. The hearings official looked at the transportation planning rule analysis that was included, and that it included reasonable worst case development scenarios as it's supposed to, and that all the proper look at the proper intersections for level of service was done correctly, supported by public works analysis. And that we think that our interpretation is that the hearings official got that part right as well. I don't know if Gabe wants to add anything on that one. This one's a little more complicated than the others.
Only just to reiterate that we do have that follow-up memo from Scott Gillespie, which I think addresses some of the related allegations. And again here, I think she found, and we agree, that their study area intersections were based on expert evidence from the applicant. We agreed to it. And we really can't reach to the TPR unless there is a, quote, significant effect, like where an intersection drops below level of service, to reach mitigation measures which opponents would like, in the event of an approval, they would like a trip cap and some other measures adopted as part of a site review to try to address that. And we just didn't feel that the authority existed based on the evidence we had or the criteria. So, and she agreed with that.
Okay, Commissioner Edwards.
Sure, Remy. This is kind of a question for staff, and Gabe, you touched on it a little bit, but so it's always been my understanding that when a specific intent is identified through the development plan for the site post a zone change, that would be the appropriate time for like a trip cap or some other mitigating, some other method to mitigate potential issues. Is that correct, or is that something that should be, I'm just kind of curious of the process.
It's a great question, and it seems to always come up in the context of when we talk about the transportation planning rule. And just to remind and reiterate, the TPR requires a theoretical worst case scenario. So it could be based on what potential uses, right? It doesn't designate or say, this is what is going to be built. It's theoretical, has to look at the worst potential trip generation, and then we analyze, all right, how many cars going through each intersection? Again, it's theoretical, whereas, if in the event that this zone change were approved and a development plan comes forward, we would then have a specific use to evaluate. And as is typical with, say, a building permit for a new use like this on a vacant site, they would have to do a trip generation analysis based on the square footage of that specific use. So it becomes very real. It's very much more precise at that point as to what's actually going to occur how many trips and where will they go? So our code provides a process for that. And if in the event that say it's a convenience store or some other high traffic generating use like a restaurant, if there are more than 100 peak hour trips, whether it's in the AM or PM peak hour, typical rush hour analysis, then a traffic impact analysis would be required, which is different than TPR, right? It is specific to the use, and it then becomes a more precise tool to evaluate, hey, do we need a trip cap or mitigation measures or whatever it might be to address the actual impact of the new use. And so that's the point at which it's logical also that the access points, driveway restrictions, or allowances would also be decided at a subsequent stage at this, as compared to a zone change.
Okay. Can I ask a quick follow-up, Chair? So based on that, and I'm curious whether or not it sounds like the appellates in their argument that this should be campus industrial and not neighborhood commercial. A C1 allows for a less intensive use than E1. So I'm curious to know if the assessment of the worst case possible scenario would be different if it were E2, or would it be similar? Is that a clear question? I apologize.
Well, yeah, I think it's a good question, but we weren't evaluating the worst case scenario for an E2 zone, right? And so that evidence isn't really in the record, and I can't really speak to, well, would it be a higher number and what would the effect of that be? Because this was focused on neighborhood commercial uses. So,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Commissioner Beeson.
Thanks. I'll try to be brief. I guess I'm going to kind of echo what the staff was saying, and I think it's good. We go through these, and I thought this one felt pretty clear to me. And the appellant is thinking the hearings official has erred on this by determining this can be done without any impact to the transportation system, is basically the way I'm reading it. And I kind of come back to what I said at the start. You've got the hearings official, you've got the staff, and then you have Public Works also weighing in and doing a pretty critical and careful review of the applicant's transportation rule analysis, and finding that this zone change, if we do it, isn't going to adversely affect the system. So it felt fairly clear. And then I think it's been said here now, I know a couple of times, but again, to just emphasize, there is no development proposal. This is a request for a zone change. And so at the time of that proposal, there'll be additional review, which will get into potentially other issues. So I'm in support of the hearings official.
Okay, commissioners, show of hands for those commissioners who believe the hearings official did not err on appeal issue number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you. Got it. Okay, appeal issue number 5.
Appeal issue number 5. The hearings official misinterpreted the C1 zone siting requirements regarding the terms convenient walking and bicycling distance and adequate support population. The appeal issue is pretty clear. Some of the argument that goes with it, a little bit unclear in that the appellant is saying that they disagree with the hearings official's statement regarding EC 92150, that it doesn't require or permit a comparison of the relative advantages of commercial land or require consideration of existing available commercial services. And also disagreeing that the hearings official regarding the determination that evaluation of an adequate support population does not include the physical ability for people to get to the proposed neighborhood commercial site. I think the term the appellant used was people don't fly. And in that sense, the appeal issue is about how someone actually gets to the site. It might be longer than the quarter-mile area that they're within because of the nature of a sidewalk system or something. Nonetheless, we think that the criteria is pretty open, and it's been discussed in the past, as again, we talked about in the RNS, that the criteria just talks about quarter mile and half mile and then 2 mile on pedestrian. And that's what staff looked at. That's the information that the hearings official had and looked at and felt there was an adequate support population.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, thoughts on this one? Okay. Yes, Commissioner Edwards.
Sorry, I was having a hard time finding my raise your hand thing. I just wanted to mention this because the hearings official actually brought this up. And if you all recall, we had this issue come up in another
Yes.
in another decision, and the topography and the, you know, this being a newer area with developed streets and bike lanes, and it's very walkable, it's very flat and all of that. I find that to be relevant. I mean, I've said this before, it's not at the top of the South Hills where, you know, bikeability, walkability and all that access is tougher for that. And so I just wanted to mention that the hearings official did actually call out that specific component of that decision. So thank you.
Commissioners, I think we're ready for a show of hands on this one. Appeal issue 5. Those commissioners who believe the hearings official did not err in her decision on the issues related to appeal issue 5. Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very good. Thank you. Appeal issue number 6.
Yeah, appeal issue number 6 is the hearings official erred by approving the zone change to C1 without concurrently applying the site review zoning overlay. And what the appellants are arguing is that they're talking about language in the Wilkins area plan. We do the abbreviation WAP for that, specifically pointing to the mention in the Wilkins area plan that the city shall ensure that future commercial development and redevelopment in the Wilkins area planning area is sensitive to, compatible with existing and planned development in the surrounding area. In essence, they're arguing that that if the hearings official finding is correct, that the adoption of citywide commercial standards fully implemented the Wilkins area plan policy, then at that time of the adoption, City Council would have eliminated the policy. And the hearings official looked at that and did not agree with that type of argument. Basically saying that that type of issue is really directed at the city, and that was prior to our citing standards, and then we then implemented those standards to take care of that issue. And that's basically what this appeal issue is about. In the zone change criteria, there's nothing in that criteria that allows for implementing the site review overlay at this point. So we think that it's our opinion that hearings official definitely got this one correct too. I don't know if Gabe wants to add in on this one too, because this one is also tricky and has layers of issues with it.
I'll just touch on it briefly. We again agree that the hearings official was correct in her determination that we don't have the authority to impose site review as a zoning overlay at this point. And I think if I have it right, this really relates back to the second approval criterion related to consistency with the applicable refinement plan. And typically when we look at whether or not we have the authority or can or should impose site review, we look closely at these policies, and it typically comes up most often in reference to the Willikinzie area plan. And this particular policy that is the focus, I think that, the starting point for appellants, which talks about ensuring compatibility between potentially incompatible uses, right? There's a long history of cases at both the hearings official and planning commission level. And we've looked at these policies in the suggested action, which talks about applying site review as a way to implement this policy, recognizing that the action itself doesn't have the same stature as a policy. So we look back to the policy itself, and it's arguably not a mandatory approval criterion. And we have this long history. I mean, it uses words like shall and then consider, right? So on balance, we look at that, we consider the policy, we look at that in the context of all the various other components of the refinement plan. But based on our knowledge of the development standards that were implemented for commercial zones back with the land use code update in 2001, and since that time we have a long history of decisions that can look at this policy as non-mandatory. So we did not feel that we had the authority to impose it, let alone site-specific criteria that are being argued about or requested by the neighborhood. So we just don't think we have the authority to require it.
Okay, thank you, Gabe. So appeal issue 6, show of hands for those who believe the hearings official did not err by approving the zone change. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So now we've been through all 6. And is there somewhere in our packet, I think I saw it. Is that our next? There it is. Sorry, I jumped over into the next.
Chair Amy, if it helps, I'd like to just jump in and mention that we did provide a draft final order.
I'm trying to find
agenda item summary. Good. And I think at this point we're looking at the possibility of a motion based on the straw poll. I'll let Lauren jump in here, but we have a draft final order that's before you. I think one way to approach this would be to determine whether or not we should go with that document as a reflection of your decision to affirm. Lauren, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. So Commissioner Ramey, I was going to point you to the draft final order is attachment F to the Planning Commission AIS for the March 18th meeting, your public hearings on this matter. And it starts at page 44, at least on my copy of the agenda. And I would echo what Gabe said. The question now is whether Planning Commission is ready to adopt that order unchanged, except taking out the draft watermark, or if there are any changes that Planning Commission would like to see as a result of today's discussion. And if the latter is the case, then we would ask for as much clarity about that as possible, and probably bring the order back to you for final adoption at a later meeting.
Okay.
I think we need to, because it has reference to potential testimony that may or may not be rejected. So we need to fill in the blank on that, so to speak.
Oh, thank you, Gabe. Yeah.
We will necessarily need to bring back the final order for final approval, but depending on the discussion and vote, we can figure that out afterwards.
So just to be clear, so we need to bring it back anyway. So what is it we're voting on today then?
That's a great question, Jeremy. I had forgotten that there were there's some information that still needed to be filled in. So I think based on the straw polls that we've heard from Planning Commission, unless there are any other changes that Planning Commission would like to see to the draft final order, staff can take it away, kind of fill in the missing information and bring it back to you for a motion and final adoption at a later meeting. We have a final order for you.
Okay, Commissioner Borowski, yes.
Okay, well, I was going to make the motion to approve the draft final order with staff's edits. And that let the Commissioner Ramey sign it after those edits. But if you don't want to do that.
Commissioner Bobrowski, I think the Planning Commission could do that if that's the will of the commission. But you also have a number of meetings coming up where this could be, a quick item based on the straw polls that you've already gone through of finding that the hearings official did not err. So we could go either way. Gabe, did you want to?
That said, yeah, if the commission is comfortable with us making the only edits is to remove the draft watermark, make sure we have the correct date for the decision, and to insert a reference to the fact that we are not rejecting any particular new evidence or testimony, then I think it is appropriate and consistent with past practice that the commission's vote could essentially authorize Chair Ramey to sign it without having to bring it back formally as part of another meeting.
I'd like to second the motion.
Okay, well, there's not actually a motion on the floor. He said he was going to make a motion, so you can make a motion if you'd like. Or
Yeah, I'll make that motion that was reflected by Gabe.
what Gabe said. Okay, now Commissioner Fregula.
I second the motion.
Thank you.
And I would like to speak to the motion at some point as well.
Well, let's do that right now. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to make it clear, the neighbors bring forward these appeals, and like Commissioner Edwards stated earlier, we're really bound to the fact of what is our approval criteria. And we can't look to what the next level of the land use process is and the actual development that may go onto that site. That being said, it is very frustrating as a neighbor who might be potentially impacted by some sort of development that results from a zone change. And so I just want to be put out there that we, as at least myself, as a citizen member of the Planning Commission, hear your concerns and know that developments do have impacts on neighbors, neighborhoods, transportation systems, and the like, but that we are bound to look at the approval criteria for a zone change only at this point. And it can be frustrating. It can be frustrating to us as myself as a commissioner that I can't impose site review on this and make something better. But I don't have that ability under Oregon statutes. So I just wanted to put that out there to the neighbors so that they don't feel that we're not hearing their concerns, because I do. I hear their concerns, but I have to follow the statutes. And I just wanted to put that out there because a lot of time, energy, and money has been put into these types of appeals. And for the people to walk away and say that our system doesn't work because they didn't achieve the outcome that they were looking for, it isn't necessarily the case. I just need that to be said.
Commissioner Beeson.
Could you restate the motion? Or somebody restate it?
You want me to do that, Gabe, or do you want to?
Somebody, just. Well, let me ask the question this way: if it's, are we? If we've got a motion and a second, I guess we're ready to vote. And what we're going to say is that the staff can go away and finalize this, and Commissioner and Chair Ramey can sign it. Is that what we're saying, or would it come back to us for any last look? I'm kind of curious about, or wondering whether there'd be any chance to have any additional comment on it. Speaking for myself, I read it pretty carefully, but it was a week or so ago, and I found myself consumed with the appeal issues. So I'm just sitting here trying to think, gosh, am I really ready for everything in there? Am I really okay with it? So,
Fair enough. Lauren Summers, yes.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Ramey. I'll look to the motion maker in a second to make sure that I have this right. But my attempt to restate the motion is that it was moved to adopt the draft final order that was attached as attachment F to your March 18th Planning Commission packet, as as amended in the following ways. Draft watermark will be removed. The date of the final order will be updated correctly. And staff will insert discussion that no new evidence was rejected by the Planning Commission. And with that motion, you are authorizing Chair Ramey to sign the decision as amended in the ways that I've just outlined. So Commissioner Beeson, to answer your question, if this motion passes, it would not come back to the Planning Commission for another look. It would just be staff making those specific changes and then giving it to Chair Ramey for signature.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask for the vote on this one. Unless there's any further, no, okay. So all those in favor of the motion, show of hands, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, thank you. Okay, so I'll look for that final order. And with that, we are on to our next appeal item. Deliberations and possible action on the Laurel Ridge PUD, which is PD 18-3. At this point, I think there are 2 commissioners who wish to speak about their participation in the virtual version of the hearing.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, and I also have a question for Lauren. But I did watch the video of the public hearing and have reviewed all the documents. And I guess the question that I have for Lauren is, I've been in, this is the 3rd time that this property has come before Planning Commission on appeals. So I've got a pretty extensive knowledge of things that may or may not be in the record from past appeals. And I'm just wondering how I should deal with that. I mean, one, I've been on the board of a neighboring neighborhood association for the last 15 years as this has played out. And like I said, I've been involved in all of the appeals leading up to this. So can you give me a little advice on that, on how I deal with the knowledge that I have in my head regarding this issue?
Sure, thanks, Commissioner Borowski. So I think the first issue would be ex parte contacts related to this application. And those are only contacts that have happened since this application was filed. So this 2019 PUD application. And I didn't hear you say that you needed to declare any ex parte contacts related to this application. Okay, great. So then the follow-up question is, what if there's other information out there? And my reminder to you and to all of the Planning Commission is, this isn't, again, an appeal of a quasi-judicial land use decision. So the evidence that you are allowed to consider is evidence that was placed before the hearings official in this process for this application. So you put your blinders on and you're looking at only the evidence that was provided to the hearings official. To the extent that, through your life, you might know something else because of past applications that preceded this one. That is, to the extent that that information is not in the record and was not provided to the hearings official in this process, you're not allowed to consider it, and it just needs to be put to the side. And then two, like I'm sorry, again, this is an appeal of a quasi-judicial decision, so you are also limited to the appeal issues that were raised in this process, and in this case, there are 2. So those are the 2 appeal issues that you're looking at, and then no new evidence that was not provided to the hearings official. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, so in the applicant's statements, they kind of went back and did a timeline history of all of the different appeals and how we got here on this one, and that's in the record. So I can go back and say, you know, we looked at parks and open space requirements in the past and things of that nature. So the things that were in the applicant's formal package that referred to past appeals are fair game.
Yes, the things that are part of the record of this application and were provided to the hearings official or you know, are argument and not new evidence that were provided to you, but are still part of the record of this application, are fair game for you to consider, assuming that they relate to the appeal issues.
All right, thank you.
And Commissioner Fragola, did you want to say something about your watching the virtual hearing?
Yes, I did watch the virtual hearing after needing to leave early, and so actually got to hear it twice.
Well, thank you for doing that. And then we did cover ex parte conflict of interest and bias issues with Commissioner Borowski as well, right? That's taken care of? Okay.
That's correct. I did not hear Commissioner Borowski needed to declare anything related to those issues.
Just want to be sure. Okay, so then, well, Nick, here we are again.
Thank you. Give me a second to share my screen. I can find the right one. There we go. I found it. And I can just get some kind of maybe head nod if it's up on the screen. I know it always takes a few seconds. Okay. Some testimony that came in, and you know, right up front, I think what we're recommending is there's nothing in the testimony that is not new evidence, at least as far as we can tell. Going to highlight a few areas that are not directly tied to appeal issues, but they were things that were brought up previously that the hearings official did have access to and saw.
Nick, can I get Lauren? Can I let Lauren get in here? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeremy. Sorry, Nick.
What do we want to
I've said this a number of times during this meeting, but just in case someone's tuning in just for the Laurel Ridge deliberations, I wanted to, again, quickly give background that, again, Planning Commission is limited to consideration of testimony, or I'm sorry, evidence that was provided to the hearings official. So to the extent that new evidence was provided to Planning Commission, staff may be asking Planning Commission to reject that new evidence. And then the other limitation on Planning Commission in this appeal is that Planning Commission is limited to consideration of the issues that were raised by the appellant. In this case, there are 2 appeal issues. And so once again, Nick has collected the written testimony that was submitted to Planning Commission and has highlighted areas that either may constitute new evidence that staff would ask Planning Commission to reject, or may constitute testimony that is not, in staff's opinion, directly related to the 2 identified appeal issues. If the latter, not related to appeal issues, Planning Commission won't be asked to take any specific action to reject that testimony. It's just kind of a flag for Planning Commission that that's beyond the scope of your consideration. If it's new evidence, then we may ask you to take specific action to reject that new evidence. So thanks for the quick overview.
Thank you.
Okay. So I sent you this document that has all the testimony in it with some highlighted areas, but I'll just scroll through real quick. First one was from Alex Doe. I don't think there's anything in here that's new evidence, although it does speak to a few things outside the appeal issues. We think it's fine. Next one is from Betty Hemmingson. And again, these were things I flagged here that were brought up as evidence during the hearing, but they're not particularly associated with any of the appeal issues. talking about the number of units and the density and how tall the buildings are and habitat values and things being a natural site, violation of South Hill study. Again, not new evidence, not associated with appeal.
So Nick, if I
Yeah.
may, that highlighted testimony, staff is saying that does not constitute new evidence. It's within the scope of the type of evidence that was provided to the hearings official, but in staff's opinion, it's outside of the scope of the two identified appeal issues. Is that accurate? So we're not asking Planning Commission to take any action. That was just a flag for Planning Commission.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Next one was from Wilson Blix. And these were talked about in a memorandum to you. I believe they came in after the fact or after the 5 p.m. deadline. There was a cutoff for items that could be added to the actual appeal statement of their attorney. It came to light afterwards that these were intended just as testimony, and it's just notes and information that was intended for their attorney to use. Again, we don't think there's anything in here that is new evidence, and is our recommendation that it stay in as testimony. Although I flagged a couple of areas that are outside of the actual appeal issues. Example, this section dealing with the forest management area, that's not one of the appeal issues. Continue on. I think there was several from Wilson Blix. And again, I flagged areas in this email that are not new evidence. They were in very similar evidence was submitted during the hearing, but these are not also associated with the actual appeal. I think it's pretty evident when you look at these. They're talking about, again, about elevations and building heights, degradation of the riparian area. All of these things were discussed during the hearing. Forest policies, Laurel Hill Basin study, things like that. Again, things about the geotech report and the unstable hillside, those things all came up as testimony. Again, not associated with directly with any of the appeal issues that came up. This one, another one from Mr. Blix, explaining, I think, what he intended. These emails that came in right after 5 o'clock on the cutoff deadline, he intended them as testimony, so we included that for you too. There is the applicant's attorney who submitted letters. We think all of this is acceptable as testimony and not new evidence. And I'm just going to scroll through real quick. I'm sure everybody's had a chance to read through these. In fact, I'm going to grab this bar and go faster. There were 2 letters, one dealing directly with the appeal, the other giving background information on the site and the history. Actually, there were 3. And I think that's everything that was flagged. I believe, yeah, that's everything. I'm going to stop sharing my screen on that.
So if I understood what Nick reviewed with us, there was nothing flagged as new evidence, and therefore no action needed to be taken unless any commissioners want to offer a different idea. Okay, so then let's move on to the appeals issues.
Oops, there, I muted myself. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to share again and quickly run through some slides. You've seen some of these already. You were at the hearing or watched the hearing last week. I think we all know we're dealing with the Laurel Ridge appeal right now. The vicinity map, providing context to where the site is in relation to 30th Avenue, excuse me. And also reference to the Glenwood connector, which is this area right here. The zoning map, I showed you this last in the public hearing. Give a sense of the zoning that's around this, mostly R1, some AG, agricultural, and the PRO, which is Park Recreation Open Space, that clips the southern portion of this property. This is a site map of the proposal that we're dealing, that the hearings official essentially approved. This was the revision that came in back in, I guess that was 2020, showing the 372 multifamily units on the west side of the property, and then the 2 single-family units within the forest management area, the continuation of Road A that would then connect to Brackenfern into the East Ridge, sometimes referred to now as East Mountain, and I've heard most recently East Highlands, it will be referred to. It's have many names. This portion of this site is not developed yet, but is a phased development that's potentially going to further develop, and then this road would potentially connect to this site. Just for context, prior to the revision and the plan that came in, which the hearings official approved, this was the plan for the single family development when it was submitted back in 2018. Well, this was probably a revision of that plan too, but by the time we got to about 2019, this was the plan that was being proposed, all single family development on almost all of the site. I just wanted to give you that context because it's referenced. And this is just a close-up view of or a condensed view of the multifamily area where all of most of the housing is. And this is the other 2/3 of the property in the forest management area and the 2 single-family home sites right here. There are 2 appeal issues, and one is about the trail connection that was initially proposed in our staff report. This trail connection and this inset map that I'm showing you was embedded in our staff report back in March, talking about the necessity for a trail connection from A down to B down here onto the neighboring property to the south, which is a parcel that the city had recently acquired. And then subsequent to that staff report, the applicant's attorney placed testimony into the record challenging that issue. And in essence, staff reevaluated their position about this issue and determined it would be a taking and that there was not the justification. And so this request by staff was removed. And I just wanted to show you contextually so you could see where it is. And I need to, I can't see the very bottom of my screen, but I just basically inserted the A and the B so you can see where this trail was actually proposed. Went from the end of the Hammerhead portion of Road A and then south, which is a significant uphill slope. The applicant in their materials that came in to challenge this talked about, well, if we absolutely have to do this, even though we're challenging it, we propose moving it and shifting it to a little bit less steep slope. And you can see here in this switchback type of trail, that's the reality of the kind of slopes here, and the only way to get something efficient that could be walked up. We just wanted to, all this information that the hearings official did have, we wanted you to be able to see it as well. And that's the end of my presentation. So I don't know if there's any questions about any of that, or I can show any of those screens again.
Thank you, Nick. Are there questions for Nick about that overview? I think we can start moving through the appeal items then one at a time.
Okay. The first appeal issue is the hearings official misconstrued the Laurel Hill Plan Refinement Plan, which includes the East Laurel Hill Development Node Plan and the South Hill Study Refinement Plan, by allowing a connection to 30th Avenue. And this is basically an appeal issue talking about the connection from the Glenwood connector, which is the area by the freeway that provides access to the Glenwood area and the Lower Hill Valley on that side. And the contention by the appellants that language in both the South Hill study and in the East Laurel Hill plan prohibit any type of street connection between that area and 30th Avenue. The hearings official looked at this in detail in her staff report, and we provided all the information that we could for you with guidance on where it's discussed, that basically says that the Laurel Hill policies are not mandatory approval criteria, but are policies for guidance and consideration in decision making. And drilling down into this argument, really what we're saying is that the Laurel Hill plan talks about collector street or an arterial not connecting to 30th Avenue, and that the collector itself, which is the Glenwood collector, once it enters the Laurel Hill Valley, would diffuse into other streets. And the appellants take a different view of reading that language and insist that one of the sentences says, and then no street connection. And we think the hearings official definitely got it right. And I'll let you talk amongst yourself about this.
Okay. Thank you, Nick.
Actually, perhaps Gabe would like to interject in this, because this is a controversial and very interesting topic.
I don't have much to add. I would just point out that, we looked at this very carefully, and because, as is the case oftentimes with relatively old refinement plan policy, there's some ambiguity built into it, right? And so we felt it necessary to go into what we call kind of an statutory interpretation, right? So looking at the text, the context, really all the parts of the plan. There are multiple policies that kind of work together here. And so we put that analysis together as part of the original staff report. Hearings official similarly walked through all of that interpretation, and also she looked at context related to street connectivity requirements in our code. I know that's something that's challenged by the opponents as well. In terms of legislative history, all that taken together, she did a very, I think, close and careful analysis and came to the same conclusion that staff did and that the applicant did. And so we think she got it right.
Okay. Commissioner Borowski.
Thank you. Yeah, for me, this one is something that the neighbors have been pretty adamant about for quite some time, that there's no cut through from 30th into the valley. And it's been kind of a because the way that the plan is written, that says that there shall be no connection to 30th Avenue, it's very easy to come to that conclusion. You know, it's written there. It says no connection to 30th Avenue. And so the neighbors and the people who are appealing, you know, I think feel that they're on pretty solid ground and have for very many years. I mean, I've always felt that, you know, that was pretty much a given. But then going in and digging into the hearings officials' conclusions that the refinement plan is not a applicable, you know, requirement. Just because it's in there, you need to consider it, but you also have to consider it with other things that have come up. So that, to me, is the street conductivity is one of the areas that has come up and was in place after this plan was put out. So I think that looking at it through that lens helps me get to agree with the hearings official. Although again, this goes back to what I said at the last one. These are very significant concerns that impact the livelihood of neighborhoods. You know, when you put a spur off 30th Avenue, you can say that it's going to a neighborhood collector, or that it's not going to a neighborhood collector, that it's going to a street. But you're going to, if you're looking to get to Franklin Boulevard from 30th Avenue, you're going to get off there and you're going to go through that area, because that is what people do, the shortest distance to any point. So I really have a hard time voting against what the neighbors' arguments are, but yet by going by what the code tells me to do, I'm feeling that I'm going to be forced to go that way. So I have a hard time on this one, because I've seen it and I've lived it for the last 8 years. Thanks.
Commissioner Beeson.
Well, there's no doubt it's a hard one. But I think, you know, when you go through the material and the hearings official's decision, I guess when you go through the material, what strikes me is, in a couple of things that have been said or points that have been made, there were policies set back in the 70s in these plans. These policies, in fact, when it comes up to 2021 and we're looking at a development, they are not approval criteria. They're policies to be considered. They provide guidance and so on. There's the talk about collector streets or collectors and diffusing and so on. I think, you know, the connection that would be contemplated through this area, I don't think it's contemplated or talked about as being arterials. It's not contemplated to be collector streets. It would be diffuse, is the way I'm reading it. I don't necessarily agree with Commissioner Borofsky on the shortest route. I don't want to say I don't really agree, but I think if it's as diffuse as it sounds like, when you're up there on 30th and you're driving, you want to get to Franklin, it's probably far faster to stay on 30th. I drive in that area a lot. I can't imagine trying to cut through a kind of windy residential streets like that, but I don't dispute that people could do that. But I guess kind of the other piece that I think is important to talk about is when we're in the urban growth area, we're in the urban growth boundary. We need housing. We're looking at a proposed planned unit development here that would provide that. And I think when it comes time to develop it and to go through and consider all of the regulations, it's important to consider there are sets of standards for building in our community that we would need to consider that relate to access into areas for emergency use or for fire or for ambulance or whatever. And I think when you look at this, if you were to say, well, gosh, we're not going to allow any connection at all, you could argue you might be just prohibiting the development of the property. So I guess for all of that, it's very hard. I agree, but I think the hearings official got it right, and I'm ready to support that.
Commissioner Isaacson.
So I guess this is a question for staff. This is the third time, at least that since I've been here, that the TPS report has been a factor, right? So we're talking about doing a traffic study on one particular road. The appellant comes back and says, you didn't check all the other side streets. Traffic's going to come down there or cut through my subdivision or cut through the parking lot or I guess really a parking lot. If it's a large apartment complex, the pathway through the apartment complex is not really a road. What is the procedure by which, when the traffic study is being done, the road is selected? Because it seems like this, again, comes back to a common theme that what you put up as, or what staff or whomever is putting up as the basis for the evaluation isn't calculating the entire argument from the people who live in the neighborhood. I think that this would absolve ourselves of a lot of these battles if we will put out the strip to be able to determine that or put that as part of the study.
I'll offer what I can in regards to that. It sounds like a bit larger context, but in this case, I'll just refer back to materials in the record. So in this case, the applicant did perform what we call a traffic impact analysis, right? So it's a more specific analysis of traffic generation and the adequacy of the streets and transportation system to handle this, which is what, a total of 376 units. So they had more precise information, like the road locations, the actual type of development proposed. They did that analysis. It's not akin to like a TPR analysis where it's theoretical. It's very much based on what they're actually proposing to do. And through their expert testimony and evidence from their traffic engineer, then again evaluated by our public works staff, they found that in this case, the road connection was not only adequate, but was actually built into the assumptions of their traffic impact analysis that a certain percentage of trips from this development would go north, right? Upon phase 2, I believe there was an estimate of about 20% of the trips of residents. This doesn't really speak to cut through potential as far as I'm aware, but that the 20% of trips upon phase 2 would actually go north on Brackenfern Road down toward I-5 through the existing neighborhood there. Otherwise, the traffic study really focused a lot on the impacts on 30th Avenue, involved Lane County jurisdiction as well. And so all those issues were looked at within the scope of the criteria that we have. And in this case, I think a large part of the issue hinges on our street connectivity requirements, which are independent of that policy in the Laurel Hill plan, but definitely something that we think that the hearings official appropriately considered.
Right, but I guess what my point is that, and I'm not trying to be argumentative, but if I'm the developer, I'm going to present you the best case for my development, right? So I'm going to go do this study. I'm going to select the roads that the data supports my development, but that isn't, obviously, even if it's correct, is unbiased, right? So there should be, from our perspective, from the city's perspective, a criteria by which we say, you're going to do a development, here's the criteria you need to do your traffic study on, or we're going to do as a counter. So that when we get to our process or to the evaluation process with the planner, they're able to say, this either matches up or it doesn't. Because again, from the neighbor's perspective, they're going to say, well, this is great. The development did on this road over here on road A, and of course it passed with their application. But on road B, the one that impacts me, You didn't do the study, and that's what's going to impact my life. So now I'm doing an appeal, and now we're coming to us, right? So I know what I'm wondering is there a process by which the evaluation is looked at in terms of the whole environment, as opposed to what each individual party who has an inherent bias is providing the data?
So in this case, I just want to reiterate, we're tasked as staff with evaluating the application and the evidence that the applicant provides, right? We don't necessarily have the resources to provide a third-party review or our own study to refute that, but we very much definitely evaluate their materials closely to determine compliance with a variety of criteria. Street connectivity being one of those, the TIA approval criteria being another, and really having our own expert in-house evaluation, if you will, from a professional engineer in Scott Gillespie as which also has quite a bit of experience with traffic engineering. So I see Lauren's hand up. I don't know, Lauren, if you want to speak to this issue more broadly at this point.
Sure, thanks, Gabe. I do have some kind of 10,000-foot comments about your questions, Commissioner Isaacson, one of which is kind of remembering that your comments are great from sort of a 10,000-foot legislative perspective, but we are dealing with a particular application here and a particular appeal issue that relates to a particular refinement plan policy or a subset of refinement plan policies. So the question for Planning Commission in this instance is, did the hearings official get it right when she determined that no connection means no connection between the Glenwood Collector and 30th Avenue versus no connection at all? Your comments and questions, I think, are much broader in scope. And, outside of this quasi-judicial process, should Planning Commission as a body say, gosh, we don't feel like we or the city are getting the information that the city needs to appropriately review applications, that's a separate legislative type conversation that Planning Commission can certainly have, but that's not particularly relevant to this particular application / appeal issue.
I understand. Thank you.
Commissioner Fragola. I'm sorry, you're muted, Commissioner Fragola.
Thank you for the reminder. So first, I don't think the hearings official erred in this issue. I think the criteria needs to be considered, and I think that's appropriate in this context that we're looking at a plan that was developed in the 1970s and considering where we are in 2021, I think it's appropriate to consider it. And I believe that it was considered, but feel that the hearings official didn't err. And my next question is to the chair. So Commissioner Remy, we are at 1:24, and I'm wondering if we are going to move to extend time or what our plan is, and would be delighted to hear your response if you want to first take a straw poll on this issue.
So as to I think it would be good to get a straw poll on this issue if we can, and a show of hands who can stay like 10 minutes longer if we can get to that. Okay, so that's everybody. So that we will, thank you, Commissioner Fragola, I was going to do a check here in a few minutes, so thanks. I think that gives us a goal to achieve and a workable approach to where we are currently. Commissioner Borofsky.
Thank you. So for me, I've got a little bit of a problem with the hearings official and their interpretation. And what it comes down to for me is on page 5 of this memo that got sent out today. It says, essentially, the city and the applicant interpret the term no connection to 30th Avenue shall be made to mean that no connection from the Glenwood connector to 30th Avenue shall be made. And Laurel Hill Valley citizens interpreted it to mean that no connection between the Glenwood connector and 30th Avenue shall be made. I fall on the second half of that. I feel that I side with the Laurel Hill Valley Citizens Association on that. And as that interpretation of that specific part of the refinement plan text. However, that also is not an approval criteria. It says it must be considered. Okay. And so for me, I'm a little bit torn because the hearings official came down on the side of the city saying from, and I'm on the side of between, but I'm considering the other parts of the argument, the street conductivity, things like Commissioner Beeson said, that there's a need for housing. So I think I can get there, but I don't agree 100% with the hearings official's decision. So I'm not sure if it might be a 5-1 vote on this straw poll, and if it is, that would be the reason why I would be the one.
Thank you, Commissioner Borowski. Growing up in Eugene and teenage driving through this neighborhood for longer than I should have probably, I'm well aware of all kinds of cut-through issues around here. And I have to say that I can see how the neighborhood plan ended up the way it did. And I can see why this would be something that would be desired from a community. However, when I read about the mandatory approval criteria and that these are not mandatory approval criteria, and I'm able to take them in context with both the passage of time, as Commissioner Fragola has pointed out, and also with the various ways to interpret to or through, or wait, from, to or from, well, whatever those two interpretations were. In either case, those are not, once you get to non-mandatory, then you're weighing out other issues. And so that is how I am going to find, or of the opinion that the hearings official did not err in her opinion, non-mandatory, and then weighing off the other rules, codes, and laws to come to the conclusion that she came to. Any other thoughts from commissioners? Okay, I don't see any others, so I think it's time to do a straw poll on this item. All commissioners who believe that the hearings official did not err in her finding related to appeal issue number 1, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those who believe that the hearings official did err in her findings related to, I guess maybe it's his at this point, appeal issue number 1, raise your hand. 1. So I have a 5-1 for that staff. Okay, it's 1:29 and we actually made it through. I'm going to look at Alyssa to see if there's anything for the staff that we should know before
Just real quick, we'll see most of you back tomorrow night for middle housing at 5:30. And then your next 2 meetings are June 7th for deliberations on commercial setbacks and June 8th to get through the second appeal issue for this particular appeal. And then we're still working on the middle of June meetings because we had held some for a third appeal that didn't happen. So hopefully we can give you some nights back, some days back there in June, and I'll leave it at that.
And so June 8th, we'll have a draft final order with some kind of word that can go either way or something probably.
We can do that.
Okay. Commissioner Isaacson.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm going to be gone the week of June 21st. I may or may not have internet coverage, depending on where I am in Colorado. But if I do, I'll be able to attend and I'll let staff know. And I'm hoping there isn't anything that deeply requires a vote for that time.
And then Commissioners Beeson, Edward, and I will be appealing, and we will be very appealing, and we'll also be appearing during forum tonight for City Council's meeting at 7:30, taking forward a summary of our letter about the public outreach process for the middle housing work. Commissioner Borowski.
Just a question for Alyssa. In the schedule, is there any time to continue our discussions that we left off on at our work session?
Yeah, I wanted to cover, I was hoping we'd have a little time today, but I'm going to hopefully that we have sometime tomorrow night and sometime in early June to talk about what was left on those and to talk about, progress that we have made on the other topics.
So if we are going to do that, could you just kind of compile some notes about what we haven't gotten to and maybe send that out again to
Yeah, absolutely. It's been at the top of my to-do list we have summary notes and I will absolutely send those out as well.
Commissioner Fragola.
So I'd like to request that discussion occur when all of us are able to attend. And if you recall, tomorrow evening was added at the last minute and was not a time that worked for all commissioners. And so I would hope that the retreat items would be something that we could all be present to follow up on. And in relationship to that, I will not be able to be present at tomorrow evening's meeting. And so I did just want to say that I will email Terry, but I also have the utmost confidence in my fellow commissioners to provide great feedback on the remainder of that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for that vote of confidence. That's 1-0, very good. Anything else from any other commissioners? Terrific. So we'll be back tomorrow evening, most of us, many of us, and enjoy your more than 24 hours off. See you then.